Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And we're streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube, where these videos are available to watch anytime afterwards. And if you've not already done so, please silence your phone. MDH has hosted our first Religion in Mississippi History Research Fellow this year. Funded through the Lilly Endowment Incorporated, the fellowship seeks to encourage research regarding the role of religion in Mississippi history. Summer King, a graduate student at the University of Mississippi, was selected as the inaugural fellow, and on Saturday, August 24th at 10 a.m., she'll present via Zoom the findings of her research project, How the Fire Spread, Interracial Pentecostalism in Mississippi. You can register for the program on the MDH website, and we'll send you the Zoom information. It should be really interesting. Next week's History is Lunch will be in conjunction with our Flags from Mississippi Emblems Through Time exhibit upstairs. Greg Biggs will present Magnolia Banners, Mississippi Flags That Got Away. And then he'll give a gallery talk on Thursday, the next day, at 11 a.m. in the exhibition space and talk about the flags that are on view there. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Sean O'Farrell to present Palmer's Crossing, People and Place. O'Farrell earned his BA in History from Flagler College and his MA in History from Marquette University. He is completing his dissertation, Palmer's Crossing, a Black Enclave in the Gulf South at the University of Mississippi. Help me welcome Sean O'Farrell.
Oh, I forgot that. Thank you all so much for coming. So this presentation is a synopsis of my dissertation. So there's a lot of information, not quite a lot of time, but it's kind of going to be a little bit of an abridged version of all of that. So I want to thank a few people without whom this entire project would be impossible. First, my advisor, Kevin Green, and the other faculty at the University of Southern Mississippi. They've all been instrumental in making this kind of a reality. During these past 3 years of research, I've also met and interviewed a lot of people who have called Palmer's Crossing home, and I can't do this without thanking them. Hollis Hall, who founded the Palmer's Heritage Museum in Palmer's Crossing, Julia Ward, Angela Williams, Sam Williams, Tiny Jean Smith, and Jamila Jackson Stokes, all of whom provided interviews with me, and I met them. They're all friends now. I call all of them friends. I call them almost weekly, bi-weekly, to just talk. I also want to thank some people who have shared stories of the Hattiesburg Black Sox and the Hi-Hat Club, but who were not from Palmer's, namely Elizabeth LaFleur, who's from Hattiesburg, and Trey Abbey, the current owner of the Hattiesburg Black Sox, who now play out of Brandon, Mississippi. I also want to extend my thanks to Bobby Rush, who allowed me to interview him in a phone call in October of 2022, and whose descriptions of the Chitlin Circuit, the Hi-Hat Club, and Milton Barnes really structured this project. Finally, I want to thank my fiance, Maeve, who edited all of this and made it so that it's not very long. So I first drove in to Palmer's Crossing in March 2020 as a first-year PhD student. I'm not from Mississippi, right? I'm from Massachusetts, so I want to get that out. So I'm a Yankee, as I guess it would be called. And this is just before COVID isolation. At the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do for my dissertation. I was kind of floundering, and my advisor, Kevin Green, said, well, why don't you think about doing a project on the Hi-Hat Club and the Chitlin Circuit? So after doing some research on the Hi-Hat and being introduced to a staffer at USM who is now retired, her name is Margaret, I was on my way towards working on an oral history project. I went to meet Margaret at a gas station. Meeting never happened. No idea. I didn't have her phone number. She didn't have my phone number. We set up the meeting by saying, meet me at the gas station at 12 o'clock on Saturday. We missed each other. That's okay. A week and a half later, classes were canceled. COVID shut everything down. However, I was absolutely hooked on still doing this project on the Hi-Hat and the Chitlin Circuit. I tried to do research during COVID. A lot of this was archival research, but what I found was defined by what I didn't find. That is, I found almost nothing on Palmer's Crossing, almost nothing on the Hi-Hat Club, and almost nothing on Milton Barnes. At the time, I was still almost solely focused on doing a project on the Chitlin Circuit, so I went to the Blues Archive at Ole Miss, the same thing happened there. The Hyatt Club, not really mentioned. Palmer's Crossing, not really mentioned. These places weren't talked about in the archive. So I dug through Living Blues magazine. I was looking to see what artists said about the Chitlin Circuit. Maybe they had said something in their interviews that would kind of lead me in a new direction to figure out how to talk about this. No, not really. Some people mentioned it. They mentioned they played in Hattiesburg. They mentioned they played in Palmer's. They mentioned they played in the 70s and 80s, though, and that does not necessarily fit with how a lot of people view the Chitlin Circuit. So I kind of structured the project again to talk about, well, what is the Chitlin Circuit after 1950s and the 1960s? How does it change with integration after the Civil Rights Movement? What are the impacts that this is having? So that led me to Bobby Rush. In his autobiography, Bobby Rush calls the Chitlin Circuit, and I quote, an arm of the black neighborhood. I contacted Bobby Rush's manager. For some reason, they allowed me to interview Bobby Rush. First ever oral history interview on the phone with Bobby Rush. Really interesting time. Had never done that before. Hadn't taken a phone interview either. Took a call from CBS right after I hung up the phone. So it was definitely interesting. Bobby Rush to me emphasized to me the significance of the hi-hat in Palmer's Crossing, not just to him, but to black Americans across the South. And in doing so, I realized that this project wasn't just about the Hi-Hat Club, but it was about Palmer's as a whole, and how we can talk about Palmer's, and how we view Palmer's as a part of not just Hattiesburg history, but the history of Mississippi and the country. So, to understand all of this, I needed a lens. That lens was the business empire of Milton Barnes. Milton Barnes owned three major businesses in Palmer's Crossing: the Embassy Club, which is his first club, the Hi-Hat Club, and the Hattiesburg Black Sox. In addition to these, he also owned Barnes Cleaners, which was just outside of Palmer's Crossing, and he owned a contracting business and built homes within Palmer's Crossing from the 50s through the 70s. My approach became a, quote, community biography approach, which to me means I'm taking a bunch of oral histories to tell this story of Palmer's Crossing in a way that maybe isn't so much focused on exact hard details or how many people live there, but what it meant to live there and what it meant to the people who grew up there. And what I argue is that Palmer's is best understood as a hub of black business and black culture in the Gulf South. I'm currently terming this a, quote, black enclave. And it was not a peripheral community to Hattiesburg. It is integral to the history of Hattiesburg, it is integral to the history of Mississippi, and it is integral to the history of black music. So, how do we define Palmer's Crossing? That's the harder part about this. It's kind of tricky. The community is not far outside of Hattiesburg, so this is from the 1950 U.S. Census, the most recent census that we have access to that is publicly available. The green line up there is Hattiesburg, and you can see down here it says Palmer. It's Palmer's Crossing. So it's not very far outside of Hattiesburg. 5, 6, 7, 8 miles. Kind of depends on how you drive. 10 miles maybe. So this means that people from Palmer's worked in, traveled to, and were friends with everyone from Hattiesburg. People in Mobile Bowie, people in the Kelly settlement. Palmer's was not some separate place far away. However, Palmer's is said to have not been reliant upon Mobile Street. Many members in the community describe Palmer's as a, quote, little village, where neighbors take care of one another, and that Palmer's was a self-sustaining community. So there were multiple different neighborhoods in Palmer's that I want to mention. You can see them listed on the left up here. We have the Hill, the Crossing, across the creek, the airport, and the Hole. All of those were described by David Mitchell, and then James Lammy Hughes as another neighborhood to this list called the Pine. So I'm going to provide some brief descriptions of these to kind of center ourselves a little bit. The Hill was a neighborhood that was located on Old Airport Road, and it is the main road that goes through Palmer's Crossing and is where Milton Barnes' Hi-Hat Club was located. The Crossing, on the other hand, was located through Palmer's at the railroad crossing as it splits, It currently splits into Tatum Road. The crossing was the main shopping center of Palmer's. It is where various cafes and stores and everything was located. The neighborhood described as across Priest Creek, on the southern side of Palmer's Crossing. At the airport, it's pretty easy to find. It's down by Hattiesburg Airport. And the Hole, according to David Mitchell, was a nickname for the people who lived off of Hood Road in Palmer's. And while James Hughes never clearly said where the Pine was in his interview, there is a road called Dixie Pine, and there is also an old club called The Pine that was located in Palmer's. Assumingly, those are related. However, even with all of these different neighborhoods, Palmer's is best defined as a small, semi-rural community outside of a major New South city. For example, Charles Wilson, whose family moved to Palmer's in the early 1950s, described Palmer's as, quote, lacking in city-like infrastructure. He says that many people were still reliant upon wells and things like that. And while that was not uncommon, what he was trying to describe is that seeing Palmer's in the same way that you see Hattiesburg is not going to work. So a little bit of history about Palmer's from what I have found and can gather. It was founded by a man named Palmer about 1879 who first moved to the area. From 1879 until the start of the Second World War, Palmer's continued to grow, albeit at a much slower rate than the city of Hattiesburg. Many residents have said that the main period of growth occurs around World War II and shortly thereafter, as black soldiers frequently came through the area thanks to the community's location to Camp Shelby. In addition to this increase in population, World War II saw a boom in black business in the region, and it is during this time that Milton Barnes founded his first business. So Milton Barnes' first business is not located in Palmer's Crossing. It's called Barnes Cleaners. It's just outside of Palmer's. His son was very specific when I interviewed him that said this is South Hattiesburg. He founds this in 1935, and in 1937, shortly after opening Barnes Cleaners, as he is trying to make an established business, he meets someone named Captain Archibald from Camp Shelby. Now, Captain Archibald was from Pennsylvania and was stationed at Camp Shelby with the U.S. military. Archibald asked Barnes to clean uniforms for officers and enlisted men. Barnes said, yes, of course I will. So Barnes began to alter, clean, and tailor all of the Army's uniforms down at Camp Shelby. And that is how he started to expand his business empire. He does so by expanding his first business empire into the Embassy Club in 1939. However, this is just one small part of what made Palmer's separate and unique. A lot of people call it a little village. So, to talk about what it means to be a little village, Palmer's was self-sufficient. Palmer's had various farms. People had vegetable gardens. They raised cows and animals and hogs. There was cafes and juke joints and bars and restaurants, grocery stores and churches. Looking at Palmer's and just seeing it's a neighborhood outside of Hattiesburg where people from Palmer's have to go to Hattiesburg to get something they might need, that wasn't going to work. That's not what it was. As a result of all of this, we can also talk about Palmer's as having a, quote, village mentality, where people supported and cared for one another. If someone slaughtered a hog, for instance, they would trade some of that meat from the hog for some vegetables from someone else's garden. In other cases, I've been told the story of someone using garden vegetables and animal meat to pay for a haircut at a barbershop. This extended further than just sharing foodstuffs. So when recalling their childhood, James Hughes, Julia Ward, and Jamila Jackson Stokes, they all remember that they were raised by the community. Not just their parents, not just their extended family, but everyone in the community had a part in raising them and taking care of them, making sure that they were on the right path. A place that is described as, quote, where everyone was your mother and everyone was your family. This meant when kids were out, the other adults looked after them. If you broke a window and got in trouble, someone saw it wasn't your parent, you were going to get in trouble from that person. They were going to tell your parents. By the time you get home, you're going to get in trouble from your parents too. Doesn't matter if you were already disciplined. It doesn't matter if you got yelled at before. You're getting yelled at again. So what further made Palmer's into this little village is the stores, the restaurants, and all of that. So most of these stores, most of these places that people went are owned by Black Americans. So in addition to the MSC Club and the Hi-Hat Club and other business owned by Barnes, Palmer's was dotted with small cafes. Robert McIntyre states that, quote, "Back then, there was just about a nightclub or cafe on every corner. There was nothing short about nightclubs back then." Sheila Cooper Johnson recalls that Palmer's, and this is a long quote, I apologize, that Palmer's had the Elks Club. They would have dances and stuff, but they weren't big enough to hold the big acts like the Hi-Hat. And then they had the Aquarius Club. In addition to those clubs, they had a lot of little juke joints, and there were places where people would just go and sit around and have a drink and socialize with one another, like Sandy Jones and Roger Lee's. Miss Elma Chapman had a little club down there pretty close to where the Peacock used to be. What this is describing is that Palmer's was a bustling Black neighborhood, a bustling community, and it had a lot of things that it didn't need to go to Hattiesburg for. Why would you go to Hattiesburg for nightlife when you had 10 clubs right there, which have been described as you could go in one club, out the door, in the other door, out the back door for that one, and then in the next door for the other club again, all on the same night. No point to go to Hattiesburg. Lily Jackson Easton, she also remembers some of the clubs that are in Palmer's that are not named above. She specifically named Tashiki's and the Aquarius Key Club. And then Charles Wilson stated that scenario I just talked about where you go in one club and out into the other. The Hi-Hat, Tashiki's, and Club Desire were all located right near one another on the hill in Palmer's Crossing. Part of the issue with doing this research is that many times people recall names of restaurants and cafes, not by the name of the restaurant or cafe, just by the name of who owned it or who ran it. So, for example, David Mitchell recalls that there were two cafes right next to one another, Miss Gladys's and Mr. Griffin's. That's all we have. Food was served, music was played, and fun was had at all of these spaces. There was always something to do, there was always a place to grab a bite to eat, and the number of stores and cafes, and this is not to mention the movie theater, the ice cream parlor, drug stores, and jewelry stores that were within Palmer's Crossing. Palmer's was not a peripheral neighborhood to Hattiesburg. It is a Black enclave in the Gulf South, right off US 49. Perhaps the most famous little restaurant in Palmer's between the 1950s and the 70s was Miss Gladys's restaurant, and I say famous for a very particular reason. So, first, Miss Gladys moved her little cafe from Mobile Street into Palmer's Crossing, which shows the want and the need for all of these services in Palmer's. But what really makes Miss Gladys's restaurant famous is the interaction that she had with Ike and Tina Turner. So Ike and Tina, they came almost twice a year to the Hi-Hat Club to play for Milton Barnes. He says they did that for about 10 years. Sometime in the 1960s, I was never provided a date. No one really remembers the date, but the date doesn't matter. Sometime in the 1960s, before Ike and Tina broke up, Ike and Tina were in Palmer's. They were performing at the Hi-Hat Club, and they asked a young man named James Lammy Hughes and his friends if there was someplace open that they could get a bite to eat. Apparently, according to Hughes, they were craving some, quote, good old-fashioned soul food. So Lammy pointed them to Miss Gladys's restaurant. He coordinated the dinner, and then Ike asked Lammy for some alcohol. He said, "Where can I get some moonshine? Would you be able to get me some moonshine?" Lammy said, "Sure, I can get you some moonshine." I have no idea where he got the moonshine. He was definitely not old enough to get the moonshine. He got the moonshine. He brought it back to Ike. Ike and Tina are in Miss Gladys's. Moonshine is being had. Everyone is relaxed. Apparently, when this occurred, it was in like the one cold month in Mississippi, and I really mean the one cold month because it is not cold here. So Tina Turner checked her mink coat at Miss Gladys's restaurant. She put it to the side. She didn't need it while she was eating. She didn't want to get it dirty. It's authentic mink. That's a very expensive coat. Well, one of James Hughes' friend who went and got the moonshine with him decided that he wanted to steal the coat. So the coat was taken right out of Miss Gladys's restaurant, and Ike was obviously very upset. So was Tina Turner, right? Why wouldn't you be? My mink coat was stolen. So Ike and Tina went to Lammy, and they asked him, "What happened to the coat? Do you know where the coat went?" He said, "Yes, I do." And the sheriff came down, talked to Lammy. He said, "I know who took the coat. Like, come with me. Let's go get the coat back." So Lemmy brought him to his friend's house. I'm not going to use his friend's name, obviously. And Lemmy said that he called through the house and said, hey, we're going to go to jail if you don't bring the coat back. Like, I do not want to go to jail. So his friend gave the coat back. No charges were pressed. Nothing ever happened. Ike and Tina got the coat back. Everyone went their separate ways. End of the story. This might seem like kind of like a little bit odd inclusion, right? It's kind of a funny anecdote. It's a short story about a little restaurant, but it's an important part of the history of Palmer's Crossing. And that part is that black celebrities like Ike and Tina Turner, like James Brown, like B.B. King were common. It is a common occurrence to see all of those people in Palmer's Crossing. And that is what makes Palmer's special. They were so common in fact that, as we'll talk about a little bit later, all of these artists maintained and created relationships with people that were in Palmer's Crossing, friends that they made when they played at the Hi-Hat Club or the MSC Club, friends they wanted to see when they came back in town, people they kept up with. So let's talk about the Embassy Club. Unfortunately, as you'll notice, I don't have a picture of the Embassy Club. I can't find one. I have no idea where I could find one. The only thing I have is this article right here, which we'll talk about in a little bit, when the Embassy Club burns to the ground. So the Embassy was Barnes' first business in Palmer's, and the myth and legend of him founding the club takes a couple of different iterations. The first is Sheila Cooper Johnson. She states that a woman from Mobile told Milton that, quote, you ought to start you a club. And Milton said, okay, yeah, sure, I'll start a club. That sounds like a good idea. Right after that interaction, Milton went and founded the Embassy Club in 1939. The other version is that Barnes founded the club after winning it in a game of gambling, a game of craps, in the same kind of manner that he founded the Barnes Cleaners. That one is also, according to Barnes himself, a myth. Marvin Barnes, Milton's son, said that his father opened the club because he didn't like the other clubs in the area and he felt he could do better. That one is probably true to the sense that, yes, he founded the club because he thought he could do better, but it doesn't tell the whole story. The real story is Barnes used to go to a club and that I can only assume is called the Black Hawk. It is from an oral history. It might also be Black Hog. He was a little far away from the microphone, so I couldn't quite hear it. He went to this club in Palmer's, and it was run by, and I quote, a man from Memphis who ran it for a white owner. In the Chitlin Circuit and the Road to Rock and Roll, a book by Preston Lauterbach, he argues that this man from Memphis was Sunbeam Mitchell, who was a famous music promoter at the time. However, Barnes never gives this person his name. He just keeps saying, it's the man from Memphis. So we're going to go with this is the man from Memphis. The man from Memphis, he ran the club for a white owner in Hattiesburg. And one day, when Barnes is in there shooting pool after work, the man from Memphis came over to Barnes and said, well, how do you feel about buying this club? And Barnes asked him, well, will the white owner, his last name was given as Clark, would he sell it to me? Why would he sell me this club? The man from Memphis says, well, don't worry about that. I'll handle it. He'll sell you this club. As the story goes, the man from Memphis and Barnes worked together to kind of undercut the profits a little bit. The man from Memphis worked the club so poorly that by the time Barnes went up to Clark and said, hey, I'll buy this club for you, it's not doing so well, the guy was like, yeah, buy the club. I don't want this anymore. It's just a money sink. So Barnes immediately went to a lawyer in the bank, got a loan, got everything signed, and founded the Embassy Club in 1939. Shortly thereafter, he started to kind of remake the club into his image and make it nicer, in his own words. He said that it was not quite the best looking place at the time that he bought it. And his first big act is Big Joe Turner. When Barnes brings Big Joe Turner to town, this sets him on the path toward making the MSC Club one of the premier stops on what is known as the Chitlin Circuit, the string of black clubs that are throughout the U.S. South, into the Midwest, into the North, that nurture blues artists and rhythm and blues and eventually influence rock and roll. So Barnes' club is becoming more popular and more popular. All those people that are stationed in Camp Shelby during World War II, MSC Club is right there. They're going over to the MSC Club, they're having a good time. And sometime around 1944 or 1945, there is no date given, Barnes creates one of the most important relationships in his entire life. He met B.B. King. So B.B. King, a 19-year-old musician, Barnes says, why don't you come and play at the Embassy Club? B.B. King says, sure. From that first performance on, Barnes and King formed a relationship that would remain through the entirety of both of their lives. B.B. King came almost once a year to Barnes's club in Palmer's Crossing. Barnes is said to have helped B.B. King manage his books or help him deal with taxes and all sorts of other things. This is not just a, sure, you can come play at my club type of relationship. This was a friendship, a long-lasting friendship nurtured through Palmer's and through Barnes's businesses. However, even though he got B.B. King in 44 or 45, the Embassy Club was not the biggest club in town at that point. The main club in the area was known as the Harlem Nightclub, and Barnes and the owner of the Harlem Nightclub were competing for bands. However, by 1947, Barnes had a major leg up on the owner of the Harlem Nightclub because he purchased the Hattiesburg Black Sox baseball team. So, Barnes used the popularity of the baseball team to push people towards the Embassy Club. Barnes said, well, maybe I won't push this guy out of business. He went to the owner of the Harlem Nightclub and said, well, if we rotate weekends on who gets the first weekend of the month, we can both coexist and it'll be fine, it'll be great. The Harlem Nightclub owner said, no, I'm not doing that. Why would I help you? My club is better than yours. So Barnes immediately called a friend named Tom Winters in Vicksburg. At the time, Winters was a band promoter. According to Barnes, he called Winters because he wanted to book T-Bone Walker at the Embassy Club. Walker was unavailable, so Winters pointed Barnes towards someone named Pee Wee Creighton. Pee Wee Creighton and his band were touring through Meridian, Mississippi at the time, and on a Friday night, Barnes drove up to Meridian. Short drive, relatively speaking. He went up to Meridian, he watched Pee Wee Creighton perform, and after he enjoyed the show, Barnes went straight up to Pee Wee Creighton and the band and said, quote, you're playing in Hattiesburg on Sunday night. Barnes told him that there was another club, the Harlem Nightclub. It's bigger. They have a band playing Sunday night too. But guess what? That doesn't matter. I have a plan to make everyone show up at the Embassy Club. That plan was to leverage the Hattiesburg Black Sox because they had a game on Sunday afternoon. So Barnes told Pee Wee Creighton and his band to show up to the game at 4 o'clock. Dressed nice. Kind of like, probably better than I'm dressed. I actually know it's better than I'm dressed. So the band played a little bit during the game. This was not uncommon for the Hattiesburg Black Sox. They are very well known for playing all sorts of music during the games. It was a party in and of itself. But what happened is Pee Wee Creighton and the band were dressed so nice, a bunch of young men. They attracted all the young women in the area to go and watch where this band was playing. As a result of all the young women going to Barnes's nightclub, all the young men in the area then went, oh yeah, cool, I'm going to go there because why would I go to the place where there's not young women at, right? That was kind of the idea that Barnes had. As a result of this, Barnes, quote, took all the business from the Harlem Nightclub, and now the Embassy Club is firmly established as the premier stop on the Chitlin circuit in the area. From 1946 to 1950, the following bands played at the Embassy Club: Joe Turner and the Rhythm Orchestra, the Rhythm Aces, Roy Brown, Sax Carey, Gatemouth Moore, and the Joe Webb Band. This is just to name a few, and these are the ones that are only found in articles of the Hattiesburg American, the only way for us to kind of see who was touring. When bands weren't coming, there is a band called, quote, Milton Barnes and his Orchestra. I don't know if that is the Milton Barnes that owns the club. He doesn't say that he ever had a band or ran a band. Or it could be the house band of the Embassy Club if we're going to kind of assume what it could be. And the orchestra consisted of Thomas Jefferson on the trumpets and vocals, Earl and Jack, the king of the sax, and Little Joseph on vibraphone. So that would have kind of been who played when Joe Turner wasn't there, or when the Rhythm Aces weren't there. Unfortunately, Barnes stops advertising the Embassy Club in 1951, even though it was a popular destination. This coincides with Barnes's involvement in a lawsuit against Luther Cox, the Forest County registrar, who was preventing black men from voting. Barnes sued him along with 14 other black men from Hattiesburg. That is the year that any advertisements for the Embassy Club stop, even in the Jackson Advocate. However, we know that throughout the 1950s, people were still coming to the Embassy Club. They were still going to Palmer's Crossing. They were still going to Black Sox baseball games. The advertisements were just not there. The idea is that he transitioned to advertising on posters. So, the MSC Club is the best place to go. And disaster strikes. February 3rd, 1958, the MSC Club burned down in an overnight fire. It was reported on once by the Hattiesburg American saying that the fire started somehow, some way. It could have been electrical fire. It could have been anything. And that the building was made of wood and it burned to the ground. And the only person that was there at the time was someone who lived in the club. They were okay, but the building was gone. Coincidentally, again, when the MSC Club burns down in 1958, Barnes is currently battling the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission over his alleged sale of alcohol. So, while he is dealing and trying to push for black equality, his club burns down. Due to his continued civil rights activism, such as that 1950 lawsuit, Barnes had been in the crosshairs of the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, as well as other white leaders in the area, trying to prevent his activism. So as early as 1955, Barnes was accused by a grand jury of being one of the many businesses in Forest County that sold whiskey. He said, "I've never sold whiskey here. You haven't proven I've sold whiskey." So that grand jury wrote an op-ed and named each and every one of the businesses, white and black, that sold whiskey in Hattiesburg. Nothing ever happened to this. However, by 1957 and 1958, Barnes was implicated by Reverend R.W. Woolard, who's an informant for the Sovereignty Commission, as being involved with the NAACP. Barnes says at the time he was not involved, as in he was not involved in the leadership of the NAACP. But what made him a target for the Sovereignty Commission is that he wrote a personal check to the Forest County chapter of the NAACP for, and I quote, "so much money that it got him into trouble." Shortly after that accusation, in 1957 and 1958, is when he is arrested for selling whiskey in the MSC Club, and then the MSC Club burns down to the ground. Barnes never served more than 4 months in jail, and he fought the arrest. However, with the MSC Club gone, he rebuilt into the Hi-Hat Club, a thing that I do have some photos of. This is a photo of inside of the MSC Club. You can see right here. These are all provided by Tiny Jean Smith, Angela Williams, and Sam Williams, who let me scan them and digitize them for them so that they could have them preserved, and they allowed me to show them to you today. So the Hi-Hat is perhaps the most well-known part of Palmer's Crossing. It is also the most remembered part of Palmer's Crossing. Allegedly, the club opened in 1958, the same year that the MSC Club burned down. That's what we kind of come to agree upon. Barnes does say that he ran a small cafe called the Smith's Drive-In for about a year before he built the Hi-Hat Club. So the earliest that the Hi-Hat would have opened was be about 1959 if we take Barnes's word for how long he ran Smith's Drive-In. After the Hi-Hat opened, it continued the pace that the MSC Club had set, and in fact, the Hi-Hat became even more popular and even more important than the MSC Club. In almost every fashion, the Hi-Hat was the true evolution of the MSC. It was Barnes's true vision for kind of creating this entire thing. So according to Barnes, after the MSC Club burned down, he went to Houston, Texas, and visited the Palladium nightclub there because he wanted inspiration for how to build a new club and build it better than it was before. According to Barnes, that Pigmeat Martin, who was a comedian who went to the MSC Club a lot during the 40s and 50s, told Barnes that if you build the club, quote, "so nice, then you won't have to," and I quote, "ask people to come." So the idea is the club is going to be so nice that people are going to want to go no matter what. So when Barnes viewed the Palladium in Houston, Texas, he rebuilt the Hi-Hat in that image. Including in this new vision for the Hi-Hat was a new kitchen, a large central dance floor, several pool tables, table seating, bar seating, a front bar for beer, a bar in the back through a different door that sold whiskey, because yes, of course, there was whiskey being sold at the Chitlin Circuit Club. And with this new and improved club, the Hi-Hat never struggled to attract performers. Bobby Rush even stated to me that in order to get a slot at the hi-hat, you had to call months in advance. This wasn't hey, I'm going to show up next week. This was, it's December and I want to show up in May, and I need a book at that point. Speaking of artists like Bobby Rush, I want to share a few stories that people have shared with me about their experiences with artists. So like the Ike and Tina story from before. Stella Sykes, someone who grew up in Palmer's, recalls that on her 16th birthday, her family, who was related to Milton Barnes through marriage, coordinated for her to see Ike and Tina perform. A lot of people do remember Ike and Tina very fondly for performing at the Hi-Hat Club. That is one of their vivid memories. I mean, if it's your 16th birthday, you see Ike and Tina perform in a small little club in your neighborhood, I understand. That would be a vivid memory for, I hope, everyone in this room. And she said that the Hi-Hat was a special place and that it was so exciting for her and everyone else who was able to go in there and see someone like Ike and Tina perform. Jamila Jackson Stokes, whose brother, Willie Pig Stokes, managed the Hi-Hat for Barnes, she also went to the Hi-Hat at age 16 to also see Ike and Tina Turner, who was her favorite band at the time. And she vividly remembered walking into the club to, quote, psychedelic lights and shimmer dancers, and that she, quote, ain't never seen nothing like this in my life. She went in there and it was magical. She was 16, so by about 11 o'clock, she was forced to be kicked out of the bar as the kind of night progressed. This is not the only story that Jackson Stokes tells. Another story that she tells is that Willie Stokes, the manager, was such good friends with B.B. King that whenever he was there and she walked in, he would pause when he was playing and go, I see Pig's sister, and there's Pig's little sister, or this one goes out to Pig's little sister. So this kind of speaks to the interactions that these artists are having with the community. This isn't just, I got paid $500 or some arbitrary amount to play at the Hi-Hat Club. This was, I'm coming to play here, but these are all my friends. What happens is when all these artists come to Palmer's, they feel at home. That's the idea. They feel at home, and this is a place that they want to be. In addition to Ike and Tina Turner, other artists that played at the Hi-Hat for Barnes include Joe Simon, Joe Tex, Al Green, B.B. King, Bobby Bland, James Brown, Little Milton, Tyrone Davis. Any single person that you could imagine who was in any way, shape, or form affiliated with the Chitlin Circuit or black music from 1950 through the 80s, they played at the Hi-Hat Club or they wanted to play at the Hi-Hat Club. A lot of other folks had interactions with these artists too. This wasn't just the Stokes family or Barnes. Sam Williams, who tended the front bar for Barnes, stated that he sat down and talked with every artist that came into the club every single time. Or they would sit with him at the bar and talk. They even spoke with his sister, which is where all these photos are from. Tiny Jean Smith, his sister, said that every performer that came in made it a point to talk to as many people as they could. They didn't want to just show up and perform and then leave. They wanted to get to know the people that were attending their shows because this was a community they wanted to be a part of. So all the stories I've told you so far are from Black Americans in Palmer's Crossing. I'm going to share one that is from a white American. She's from Hattiesburg. She's emeritus from Southern Miss now. She was a faculty member there. Her name is Elizabeth LaFleur. In 1973 or 1974, she didn't remember the exact year. It was just when she was attending Southern Mississippi as an undergraduate student. Her boyfriend at the time was a roadie for Pooh Nanny in the All-Star Review for Mobile. Well, it so happened that Pooh Nanny was in town at the same time that B.B. King was in town. Pooh Nanny was playing somewhere in Hattiesburg. B.B. King was playing at the Hi-Hat in Palmer's Crossing. So after Pooh Nanny performed, LaFleur's boyfriend convinced her to go with them to the Hi-Hat Club, So she did. She was one of the two white people in there to see B.B. King at the time. Yes, clubs were integrated at the time in Hattiesburg, and yes, integration was occurring, but that does not mean that there was all peace and calm and quiet and happiness amongst white Americans and black Americans in Hattiesburg or in the Hattiesburg area. So with her boyfriend, they sat at a table with Pooh Nanny in his All-Star Review. All the dancers, all the singers, everyone at a little booth at the corner of the table. So LaFleur says that it was one of the greatest experiences of her life, and not just because she was in there, but because when she was sitting down at the corner table at intermission, B.B. King came over and spoke to Punani. They were friends. They had toured together. They had seen each other a lot. And then he spoke to Elizabeth and her boyfriend. And he sat with them and talked with them. And then he even brought out Lucille, his famous guitar, showed it to LaFleur, and allowed her to hold it. So this isn't just an interaction that, goes away from your memory. B.B. King handed you his guitar and sat with you and spoke to you in a small little nightclub in Palmer's Crossing. This is not to say that the Hi-Hat is just a regional place. It is definitely a A-class place, according to Bobby Rush, and even attracted people from across the country. I'm going to skim through one quick story as we're running out of time here. A man named Larry Walters, he's from Palmer's Crossing, he recalls a very distinct story from someone he calls Terry. So Terry was stationed in Germany at the time as a part of the U.S. military. Presumably he means West Germany. So Terry met a white guy of unknown nationality who spoke some English in Germany, and apparently he and this guy and Terry were talking. And Terry said that he's from Mississippi. The next question out of the guy's mouth, the man of unknown nationality's mouth, was, "Have you ever been to Palmer?" Terry, because there was a very heavy accent involved, thought that this man said palm trees, and had he ever been to palm trees? And he was like, what? I don't know. And then the guy said, no, Palmer's Crossing. And Terry went, "I'm from Palmer's Crossing." So this speaks to the legend of the Hi-Hat. This is not just something that's happening in Mississippi that people know about. Someone from Germany is asking about Palmer's Crossing and the Hi-Hat Club. What these do is kind of emphasize this fact that Palmer's is this vital community, right? That is not a peripheral place. It has a major impact on all facets of American life throughout the 20th century. Here are some additional photos from the inside of the Hi-Hat Club. You can see the little kind of stage here, Little Milton obviously on the left, and you can see some of it, but not really. These are the only photos that we have. If I had a photo of the outside, I would show you. There are not any. So the final thing I want to talk about really fast is the Hattiesburg Black Sox, because no story of Palmer's Crossing is complete without the story of baseball. So the Hattiesburg Black Sox are a semi-professional, independent black baseball team in Palmer's. They were founded in 1941 by Chuck White and Shorty Wallace. And Milton Barnes bought the team in 1947 because, and I quote, "the team didn't have a great sponsor back then." Like he did with the Embassy Club before, Barnes remakes the Black Sox into his own image, right? Barnes is building up the Black Sox like he did his club. And the very fact that Barnes purchased the team in 1947 pushes back on this idea and narrative that black baseball experiences a downfall after Jackie Robinson integrates Major League Baseball, which does occur in 1947. The Black Sox make their mark after that point. By the mid to late 1950s, the Black Sox had established themselves as one of the most important semi-professional black teams in the Gulf South, and they were known for, and I quote, "whipping all of their opponents." While their primary opponents were other teams from the Black South, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, they also played Negro League teams on the barnstorming circuit. So to list a few from 1957 until 1961, the Black Sox welcomes the Cuban Giants of Havana, Cuba, the New Orleans Bears, the Chicago Giants, the Raleigh Tigers, the Detroit Stars, and the Birmingham Black Barons, all of which played in Palmer's. Not Hattiesburg. Palmer's. Again, all of these people are coming to Palmer's Crossing. So with these teams came a score of fans to come and watch the game. And what did everyone do when they left the Hattiesburg Black Sox baseball game? Went right down the street to the Hi-Hat Club and partied for the rest of the night. And I'm going to end with a quick story about Willie Pig Stokes, who manages both the Hi-Hat and the Black Sox. So Pig started playing for the Black Sox at about the age of 14. in 1954, and he, quote, pitched 3 innings against the Jackson Cubs and struck out 6 men. He continued to play periodically for Barnes. He went to Jackson State. He got injured. He came back. So once he comes back to Palmer's Crossing, he works for Barnes full-time at the Hi-Hat Club and plays for the Black Sox. And throughout the 1960s to 1970s, Stokes basically established himself as the best baseball player the Black Sox had ever had. He's the most important one. And then he begins to manage the team once Milton Barnes kind of gets older. There are stories that Stokes was recruited to play Major League Baseball. However, his sister, Jamila Jackson Stokes, did say to me that those stories are not true and they were kind of over-exaggerated and that no one had tried to recruit him to go play Major League Baseball, even though I think he wished he would have played Major League Baseball. And I'm ending with this kind of brief snippet with Willie Stokes for a main reason. He played for the Black Sox from that 1954 season until he managed the team and Barnes sold it to Trey Abbey. He was with them forever. He was with the Hi-Hat forever. However, if you were to go and look at Southern Miss's archives, if you were to go and look at the Mississippi Sports Hall of Fame, or if you were to go and try and do a search here, not many people are going to pop up. Willie Stokes, his name isn't there. Milton Barnes, his name is there a little bit. His son's names are there, but it's not much. Part of what I hope that this did is kind of present some of this and why we need to preserve these stories and all of these things. Thank you so much.
We have time for questions. Raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone to you.
First of all, I want to tell you, I'm blown away. As someone that grew up sneaking in the Hi-Hat, and not only that, my father promoted bands, those same bands that you named, Milton, B.B. King, and I'm from Laurel, Mississippi, which is right there, so it was a big connection. I could say a lot of things about the things that you're saying, and I actually thought that I was coming here that this is some vanilla, clean story that was not going to mention the Hi-Hat. And I could just go on with a lot of things that I'm familiar with from growing up there. I guess my one question is the building still there?
So the building is not there. There is currently a Blues Trail marker that is located where the building was, and what is there now is actually a laundromat.
Actually, what?
A laundromat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's, it's right on the corner. The marker is on the road, and the laundromat is in the old location.
Okay, I'll listen to one next question, but I will certainly emphasize what you've been saying. It was a magnificent place, and unless you experience, you can't imagine the significance and importance and how many people would be there bumper to bumper, walking the streets and driving, doing it. Was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, and I hope that you're successful with it. I don't know what stage you're at now. You're halfway through, or you did the dissertation.
I'm still working on it.
You're still working on it. But I guess that you will, since we're talking about Palmer's Crossing, the first time I'm hearing about it, I would assume that you will include something apart from the music. You will include some education, the church, and the civil rights movements that occurred around the same time. I'm assuming that you will include those.
Yeah.
Part of it, because it's all part of Palmer's.
So I hope to tell. Oops, sorry.
Okay, but I'm wondering if there's any relationship between the music aspect of your presentation at the Embassy Club and Hi-Hat Club and so on, and the Delta Blues, because around that same time, some people that you've mentioned, Bobby Rush and B.B. King and those, some of them are also included in the Delta Blues. So I'm assuming that, I was wondering if there's was the relationship between Palmer's, the music at Palmer's, at the Embassy Club and the Delta Blues, which is, was located in the Delta.
So there is a relationship. I know that Barnes works with other club owners throughout the area, specifically in South Mississippi. I can speak to book shows. So Bobby Rush says that there was a circuit that would take people from Pritchard, Alabama, through Hattiesburg and down to the coast of Mississippi as part of one circuit, and then that circuit would continue up through the Delta afterwards. When I originally started this project, I did think I was going to talk a lot about the Delta Blues and clubs and juke joints that are there. And I think I still probably will try and put some of that in there, and the relationship that Barnes had with other owners or examples of other clubs. But once I realized like Hattiesburg wasn't represented almost at all within the larger narrative of blues music, I kind of focused a little bit. And I do want to say also that there is a lot more that we could talk about like civil rights and education and the churches that are in Palmer's that I just had to cut for time and focus on one thing. But I do hope to include almost all of that, because that is a very important part of the story of Palmer's, and also an important part of everyone's lives that also experienced all of these things, because they were all going on at the same time.
Yes, enjoyed your presentation, but why didn't you include something on Vernon Damon, his contributions? I don't see how you can mention Palmer without mentioning him.
Yeah. Vernon Damer is another important part of this too. I made the decision to focus on Milton Barnes's specific business empire as a way to kind of focus on what Barnes was doing, because I know Damer has a lot of stuff written about him so far. I know William Sturkey has done a fair amount with Damer, and so have other historians like Eve Wade or even Patricia Michelle Boyette. In my larger dissertation, there is, when I do talk about civil rights, there's a lot more about the relationship that existed between people from Palmer's and Vernon Damer. A lot of the people that I talked about today, including Jamila Jackson Stokes and Julia Ward, all went to Damer's farm at one point or the other during Freedom Summer and afterwards to kind of pursue black equality and civil rights in the area. So it just kind of reduced it out of this presentation, but it is in my larger overall body of research.
Yeah, I grew up in Hattiesburg. My dad and I would be the only white folks at the Black Sox games on lots of Sundays. And we went because it was really good baseball, but we also went because it was the only place in Hattiesburg you could get a beer on Sunday. And you would be buying it right in front of the sheriff.
Yeah, I have heard.
Yeah, so, I'm well acquainted. I knew Pig Stokes. He could really hit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was a great hitter. He lived in the hi-hat.
Mm-hmm.
I worked at the paper, the Hattiesburg American, and to get the scores and a report on Sunday's game sometimes, we'd wake him up in the bar and he'd give us the report. Those are wonderful memories. It was a great place. I mean, just remarkable. One more story. In 1961, my dad took me to Houston, and he had a good friend that played for the San Francisco Giants, and his best friend was Willie Mays. And Mays told me, I was just a kid, I was 9 years old, that he played in that ballpark. He played in Laurel and Hattiesburg. I guess when he was playing for the Birmingham Barons.
Yeah, that must have been that would have had to have been.
I wasn't there for that. I'm not that old.
I wish I could have been. Thank you.
One thing about Palmer's, there were two sisters from there,
Mhm.
Joyce and Dory Ladner, and they went to Jackson State College, as it was called then, And they became active with civil rights and with Medgar Evers. But Giles, who at that time was president of Jackson State, was very fearful of civil rights activity on his campus because he was afraid the state would shut him down. So they transferred to Tougaloo. Dory died just about 2 or 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I had spoken once, but Joyce and I had remained in touch over the years. And I met Joyce in Palmer's Crossing when she was visiting her mother's. But I told you about the projects I did with the Community Action Agency. By that time, Palmer's was sort of a shell of its former self. It was an aging community, a lot of older people that were trying to find bus service to Hattiesburg that had been cut out. And a Head Start Center there that I used to do some work with. But they all seem to remember the glory years of Palmer's, the ones I had spoken to in the 70s.
Yeah, Palmer's was one of those places that if you were around the Hattiesburg area, you would have heard about it. And that's one of the really surprising things about pursuing this project is that everyone you talk to has heard about it or knows about Palmer's or knows about the Ladner sisters or Victoria Jackson Gray, Vernon Damer or Milton Barnes, but only so many of those people that were involved in all of these different things are included in the way that we officially remember those people and those places and those events. And by officially remember, I mean, places like archives and institutions. And I do hope that utilizing oral histories does help us kind of place some of those memories into those places so that future generations can know about them too.
You didn't mention Victoria Gray,
Mm-hmm.
who ran for Congress in 1964, and along with Ms. Hamer and Ms. Devine, went to try and displace the Mississippi delegation in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
And Victoria was an important person in Palmer's Crossing.
Yeah, I did not include civil rights in this a little bit for a specific reason, and that is because when we do talk about Palmer's, civil rights is oftentimes what we talk about when the community is a lot more than just the activists that were within them, right? It's like they all had a very major impact, and I'm really hoping to include their stories and then also paint a picture of Palmer's as like a holistic community that has all of these different things. So that is why in this presentation I kind of excluded some of my conversation about civil rights, but there is portions of my dissertation that do include all of those things that are occurring.
So I'm so glad to see that there are young researchers who are unearthing these stories that probably wouldn't get the attention. So I'm interested in the dissertation becoming a book. Is that possible? Are you thinking that in that direction?
Yes, I want to comment twice because I know I said this at the beginning, and I'm going to say it again here, that I've done some of these oral histories, but the person that I really have to thank most who has conducted a lot of this work, her name is Hollis Hall, who runs the Palmer's Heritage Museum. You can find them on Facebook if you type that in, and all of the stories that I've talked about today are videotaped on Facebook and available for all of you to see. And I know that, like, yes, as a person that's working for an institution, like unearthing them because no one has used them before, but she has done a lot of the legwork here, and I can't come up here and speak without giving her a lot of credit. As for the question about a book, I do hope so. So I have to finish my dissertation. I am on track to finish this year. And by this year, I mean in May, to finish writing it and defending it and all that. I've got 4/5 of it completed at this point, so not too much longer to go. But I do hope that it does become that, because then this is another way for people to get access to these stories. And it might point them to USM's archive or Palmer's Heritage Museum or MDAH or somewhere where they can also then unearth even more stories about it. So I hope so.
I know you're at the end of your dissertation. You don't want to hear anyone say, "Hey, what about this?" I've been there too. But Jackson State has an archive, and I know Jackson State has a linkage back and forth to those types of things. So you might consider when you start to write book, or revise your dissertation to the book, that Jackson State does have an archive in the library that it's extensive. I don't know how much there is about Palmer, but if you're going to find anything, it would probably be there about the stuff.
Cool. Thank you for that. I'll definitely have to go and dig through their digital finding aids.
And even though it's not based out of Palmer's anymore, the Black Sox still exist, right?
Yes, so the Black Sox are still around. They're actually run out of Brandon, Mississippi now. So shortly after a tornado 10 or 15 years ago that came through Hattiesburg, I was not here then. I was not a student at USM at that point. They moved to Brandon. The current owner, his name is Trey Abbey. You can also find them on Facebook, and they advertise their games still, and they're part of kind of the semi-professional baseball circuit in the area, and they do a lot of traveling for tournaments and stuff too. So they're still around if you still want to see them play, and they do a lot of work that memorializes Milton Barnes. So they have a 41 patch on their arm and things like that. So
Thank you all for being here. I hope that we see you next week when Greg Biggs will talk to us about the flags exhibit that's upstairs, the History's Lunch on Wednesday, and then a gallery talk on Thursday. Help me thank Sean O'Farrell for this fantastic presentation today.